The future of football is now. The NFL Draft is here, and the Athletic Football Show is bringing you all the action live on YouTube on April 24th and 25th.
From the first overall pick in the draft all the way through the last pick in round 3, we'll break it all down in real time. Who's going at the top? What trades will shake up the draft board? There's no angle in this draft that we won't cover.
We'll have expert analysis, insight powered by the Beast, guests from the Athletic newsroom, and everything you need to know from one of the NFL's signature events.
Don't just watch the draft, experience it with the Athletic Football Show, streaming live on YouTube, April 24th and 25th. Joining us now for the final installment, the finishing out of the first round here in our On the Clock series, it's our friend from CBS, Mike Renner. Mike, how you doing, man?
I'm doing great, Robert. Thanks for having me, man.
Appreciate you doing this. We've had some good guests. Trevor was on, Ben Smolek was on. We had a couple other draft folks on to do, their section of the first round. Very excited to have you here to round things out. I'm going to do this very quickly. I'm going to go back and first explain the exercise and then list off the players who've been drafted so far before getting into the final picks of the final 7 picks of the first round. So what we've done so far here is that I've had 3 different guests on, and we've done 6 to 7 picks per show. And what we've done, I've given 3 options per team, and then the guest has done what they would do if they were on the clock with these picks. We've had the first 25 picks of the first round. I'm going to go through them very quickly so people listening know who is on or off the board, and it might help explain why certain guys aren't being mentioned as options. So here we go. 1 to 25, speed run. Cam Ward, Shedeur Sanders, Travis Hunter, Abdul Carter, Mason Graham, Will Johnson, Armand Membu, Will Campbell, Tedero McMillan, Ashton Genty, Tyler Warren, Jalen Walker, Kelvin Banks, Colson Loveland, Mike Green, Jahad Campbell, Donovan Jackson, Matthew Golden, Donovan Ezeraku, Walter Nolan, Luther Burton, Emeka Ibuka, Jedi Barrett, Malachi Starks, Josh Simmons. Those are our first 25 picks. I sent you these yesterday. Before we dig into yours, any big surprises for you with the first 25 picks and where some of those picks might have landed?
I think the biggest one was Donovan Jackson to the Bengals. That's one I haven't seen yet. I believe, right, Tyler Booker is still on the board here. Tyler Booker's still the Alabama
All of the
guard.
other interior players are still on the board here.
Gray Zabel's still on the board here. To have him go above, it's just not something. That's just like, that to me was the biggest surprise by far. Who made that pick?
That was Ben Solak. You could take that
so
up
he's
with
a Donovan
Ben Solak.
Jackson stan. So he
is a Donovan Jackson guy.
I think he's good. I'm not like, I think he has a really high floor for the NFL. I just think like Booker and Zabel for like the respective teams. And I think Booker specifically for the Bengals is like your dream guard candidate for that gap scheme, those 2 big monsters they got at OT. I think he's your perfect guard for that team.
We went through that, the idea that the last guy who I think would have been like a first round selection who tested so horribly that it sent him kind of spiraling down the board was probably Orlando Brown Jr., who is the left tackle for the Bengals.
Yes. And oh my gosh. I mean, he was first rounder until the combine. And then now I think his testing was even worse than Booker's, right? Like his was like,
it was all time bad.
Yeah. But I mean, they had to change their scheme up because of those guys, because like Orlando Brown, they don't run outside zone anymore, right? They had to do completely different stuff. But if you're not running outside zone, Tyler Booker's your man, dude. He is your man at the guard position.
Any pairings that you liked that you hadn't necessarily thought of before? You're like, ooh, I hadn't really considered that as a fit, but now that I see it, I actually do kind of like it.
I think Jalen Walker to the Cowboys was one where I was like, I'd never even, in a mock or whatever, seen that, thought of that. But then I was thinking about like, man, just like, imagine just another like when Micah Parsons was off ball there for the 3 weeks that he did it. I was super intrigued by what that could have been.
It was against the Packers, so I'm sure you were very happy that they decided to do it over those 3 weeks.
Right. So whatever that was, I was like still very curious about what that could look like to have a really high end off ball blitzer in that defense. Why not add one, Jalen Walker? Like he could be that guy now. He could play off ball there or on ball or shoot like these hybrid guys that we're seeing proliferate around the NFL. He'd be perfect in that role.
Danny Kelly did some weird stuff from whatever it was, 6 through 12, but we embrace that here, and hopefully we'll have some weird ones with the last 7 in this entire exercise that we're doing. So let's dig into it. The Los Angeles Rams are picking 26th overall. Your 3 options for the Los Angeles Rams. Option 1, draft Josh Connerly from Oregon as your right tackle of the future in the last year of Rob Havenstein's deal. Option 2, draft any cornerback of your choosing. This is one of the only positions we're going to do this with in this run of 7 picks because there's so many corners, it feels like, that are late first, early second round picks. I didn't want to box you in with which of those guys you could take here. So whatever corner you prefer is available to you here. Option 3 is take Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe. So those are your 3 options. Josh Connerly, cornerback of your choosing. Jackson Dart or Jalen Milroe is the quarterback of the future in LA. What are you doing if you were on the clock?
I was going to say, I don't like this quarterback class. I just don't. I like Cam Ward. I don't have, when I'm going to drop my next board, I don't have another guy in the top 50. It's just, I see it like 2022 where after Cam Ward, and there's wasn't even Cam Ward in 2022, but like the next guy is just at best a low-end starter. I just don't see high-end starter traits from the rest of this draft class. I'm sorry. So I'm not going to go my quarterback of the future. It's not like a Jordan Love pick where Jordan Love had high-end traits at Utah State, right? And then you're kind of banking on that developing. I don't feel like these are developmental guys. They're almost more like somewhat NFL ready-ish, not Jackson Dart, but some of these other guys where, maybe they could fill a role, but it's just like super low-end starter. So I'm not excited about that in the first round.
What about Milroe, though?
Milroe's definitely he is the traits guy high end. Yeah. Okay. Sorry. But I almost look at him and I'm just like, dude, he is so far behind the 8 ball developmentally. How long does it take? Like how much leash do you give these guys? And now that's why like a Rams would be a great situation for him. Someone who's got a starter that realistically 3 years is the timeline where you're not even year 2 turning the keys over to him. But the timeline's such that you got Matt Stafford, you want to win a Super Bowl, right? I think you're adding players that can do that. And where the Rams missed out having that 8-year drought, right, was it 8 years? But they didn't have a first rounder, was the trenches. They addressed it when they finally got a first rounder last year with Jared Verse. I think they're going to go back to the trenches again. I don't buy the cornerback hype. That defense doesn't set up to feature number 1 corners at this point in time. It's just so much zone, so much off coverage that I think they would much more highly benefit from adding a tackle of the future who can maybe even play guard for you right away. So I'm going Josh Connerly there.
I understand the argument for that. Part of the reason I dropped the cornerback thing in is I wish they were more aggressive about adding a high-end cornerback. The idea of you want to win a Super Bowl and you're going to walk into training camp with Ahkello Witherspoon being one of your outside starters makes me physically uncomfortable. And so even in free agency, I was just like, can this be whatever guy, whether it was DJ Reed or Carlton Davis, whoever, was this going to be the team that decided to spend on one outside corner? Because traditionally, even if they haven't done a lot of that, where they've had multiple highly paid pieces in the secondary, they've had one every once in a while. And right now, they barely even have one. So the thought of just one swing at corner, I kind of want it for this team, but I do think that you're right in that they're not conceiving of it that way.
Yes. And honestly, I think Jalen Ramsey's going to be a Ram when it's all said and done. I think they flip a 4th. All of a sudden, Ramsey's back in a Rams jersey.
That feels like more the move they would make rather than spending a first-round pick on a corner, because that's just never how they've really thought about this other than the Ramsey swing that they've taken. So I totally understand that. And again, Havenstein's going to be in the final year of his deal. He's getting a little bit older. So even if Connerly isn't going to be a day 1 player for you, there's a chance he's your starting right tackle as soon as 2026. And when you're a team in the Rams situation, I don't mind kind of having red shirt type approaches for these guys at this range of the draft. I think that's okay.
Yeah, I'm right there with you.
Let's get to the Ravens at 27. Here are your 3 options for, you have 4 options for Baltimore, because the guys on the board, I didn't want to tighten it up because I think that you could make a justifiable argument for any of these 4 directions. Okay. Option 1 is draft any of the pass rushers that are like top 10 talents according to some people. Right. So you could take Shamar Stewart who's still on the board. You could take Mykal Williams here, who's still on the board, or you can take James Pierce, who I'm not sure what your current board looks like, but I think you had him ahead of both of those guys on your initial big board.
I did, way back in going into the season, but I do worry about the off-field stuff, and I worry that he's just a little bit stiffer. So on my board, how I have him ranked right now, my final board, it is Mykal, then Pierce, then Stewart. And I'm right there with you that I could see any team buying into either of them as top 10 talents. They are truly all physically gifted in some way, shape, or form. I just lean Williams because I think he shows the closest thing to an NFL skill set right now.
I would agree with that.
And it's not as if he doesn't have tools that could reach a high end at the NFL level. I think I'm a comp for him is like Carlos Dunlap. He's just a real good power end. And for Baltimore, like the interior flexibility is nice for that defense as well. So that's where I'm going to go.
No, that was
sorry,
that was option one.
That's where I would go of those
option.
three.
That was just option one was either of those three pass rushers. So let's keep going. Option two, you draft Tyler Booker or Gray Zabel. They step in as your left guard from day one. Obviously, Voorhees started the season there last year. He gets hurt. McCary steps in. Now McCary's gone. You don't really have the interior depth that the Ravens typically do if you look at the roster right now. So guard is an option for there if you want it. Option three, cornerback of your choosing. Once again, they bring in Chidobe Awuzie, but how good do you feel about that if that's a day one outside corner for you? So cornerback is available to you here. And option four, you draft Derek Harmon or Kenneth Grant, because it kind of is a similar thought process to the interior of the offensive line. If you look at it right now, they don't really have a lot of bodies behind those starters with Travis Jones and Madubuike. So if you wanted to draft a guy to be a rotational piece now, he could be, kind of steps into a bigger role next year. Travis Jones is in the final year of his contract. That's available to you. So you got 4 different routes you could go for the Ravens. Pass rusher of your choosing, Tyler Booker or Gray Zabel, cornerback of your choosing, or Derek Harmon or Kenneth Grant. What are you doing if you're Baltimore?
This one's tough. I think corner is my least favorite of those. I think I'm going to keep poo-pooing.
I think that's fair.
A lot of these teams, and it's because you drafted one in the first round last year, and
Yep.
I think back-to-back years using a first rounder on corner, and even a few years ago using one on a safety. That's just a lot of resources into a position that's ROI generally not as much as like edge in the first round, right? It's just you can find corners later. Hard to find high-end edges later, and so I'm kind of thinking at this. Now, the highest guy on my board is Derek Harmon. Obviously, I've heard that he might fall due to medical concerns, whatever. But I think the fact that Harmon would be third fiddle right out the gate versus Mykel Williams being able to conceivably be a starter from day one, at least an early down starter, I think probably pushes that for me a little bit towards Mykel Williams. And the fact that, Nnamdi Madubuike is not going anywhere anytime soon. Harmon, as much as I think he could play like a little nose and like play some of that, he's not replacing Travis Jones' skill set in the nose full time.
Sure.
So I'll go Mykel Williams. I think that's the pick.
I think that makes total sense. And this would just be a classic Ravens thing where a guy who is 12th on everybody's boards is sitting there at 27. You and I were talking about this a little bit yesterday. You weren't necessarily surprised that these guys who are pumped up as maybe top 12 prospects have fallen in an exercise like this because no one's had the stomach to be the one to make the swing on them.
Yes. It's a unique class because such high-end athletes with such little production. And you usually get like one or two of these guys, your Tyree Wilsons, your Trayvon Walkers. This year it's 4 or 5. It's a handful. There's so few guys who have both in this draft class. Zabel Carter, and then that's kind of it for like who has the traits and the production. So.
And Mike Green, even maybe you can make an argument for Mike Green, but there are a ton of concerns there and the competition level. So there's a question mark with everybody on some front.
Mm-hmm. And that's why I have Mike Green. I have Mike Green and Jalen Walker as my next 2 edges after, just because like you want both at the end of the day. So, and again, when I'm stacking up Mykel versus the other 2, he's just closer, in my opinion, to an impact at the NFL level. And I could see it with him very easily. Whereas the other 2, you're really squinting for reps where you're like, that'll work against NFL tackles consistently.
I think that's fair. And I think against the run specifically, you see the length show up where from day one he's going to be able to chip in there. And even they don't show up a ton like these kind of advanced pass rush moves, I would say. But every once in a while he'll throw in like a little bit of a cross choppy, like double hand swipe thing. And you're like, okay, he's a young player. He was banged up last year. At least I see the flashes from an pass rushing arsenal perspective with him. With the other guys, especially with Shamar Stewart, you don't even see that. Like you're really just betting on the physical traits. And so that's why I can talk myself into Williams a little bit more easily than I can with Stewart, even if I have some concerns about the ceiling with a guy like that.
Mm-hmm. And Williams of the 3 is also then the youngest. I think he's like a half year younger than the other 2. One of the youngest in the draft class. So.
Yeah, I think that's totally fine. I think the Ravens would be pretty happy if this is how it all ended up shaking out. We get to the Detroit Lions at number 28. Similar kind of arsenal or array of needs here for Detroit as it is for Baltimore. So we're going to have a lot of the same guys as part of this conversation. With Detroit at 28, your first option, pass rusher. You draft Shamar Stewart or James Pierce. Those are the two guys that are left here. Option 2, draft Tyler Booker if he is still available. He is in this exercise. Or if you like Gray Zabel better, you can draft Gray Zabel. I'm giving you that option. Option number 3, you draft Kenneth Grant or Derek Harmon. Of those 3, what are you doing if you are the Detroit Lions?
This one's tough. Because I love Tyler Booker there because you get just an utterly dominant unit. I'm obsessed with in the NFL building units that are so far and away the best that like you can hang your hat on it. Just like I want to build elite whatever, and then once you have that, then everything kind of can waterfall off of that. Just makes your life easier knowing you're going to win one matchup every single time you hit the football field. So I love the idea of just building this offensive line that's just unstoppable. And with Tyler Booker, I think you would be. But also, like, your D-line could be unstoppable if you went Derek Harmon and he hits. Like, you have a defensive line that we just didn't get to see last year at full strength. And when it did, it was nuts. That early season Lions, when Aiden Hutchinson was cooking, they were, I mean, legitimately one of the best defenses in the NFL at full strength. We never got to really see it. So, man, this is a tough one. I think I'm just going to lean Harmon just because I do have a much higher grade on him than I do Tyler Booker. You could maybe get a guard. I'm not saying you're going to get Tyler Booker later in this draft, but you're definitely not getting a Derek Harmon, in my opinion, later in this draft. A guy who's like a real 3-down defensive tackle after this.
I love Derek Harmon. Derek Harmon is like one of my favorite guys I've watched in this entire process. The idea of dropping him into that defense is very much exciting to me. And what I think the Lions need is just pass rushing juice from somewhere, whatever that position may be. Mm-hmm. And if you look at defensive tackle specifically, I think some people are going to see the makeup of that room and they're going to be like, do we have enough guys there? You already have Ali McNeil. You already have DJ Reader. You already have Levi Anzarike, who you brought back. Makai Wingo had some flashes for you as a rookie. But if you look at it, Wingo and McNeil are coming off of pretty big knee injuries, so they may not even be ready for the beginning of this season. And DJ Reader's contract is up after this year. So there's a chance by the start of the 2026 season, you need another bigger body player that you could potentially play next to McNeil. And I do think even if Harmon is probably best suited as a 3-technique pass rusher type, he could get by there in a pinch. Like you could play those two guys together. So that thought of him being like your other defensive tackle of the future with Aleem McNeil, I actually like that a lot for Detroit.
Yeah, I that's where the more you discuss it, the more I'm just like, yeah, that's because, again, you have a defensive line unit that I said I'm chasing an elite unit. That's an elite unit, in my opinion.
And the bigger need is probably on the edge because after you get past Aiden Hutchinson, we're talking about Marcus Davenport again. And I do think that if you took a pass rusher in the first round, like an edge rusher, he'd probably be a bigger contributor for you and a more important piece in 2025 than whatever defensive tackle you were going to take. But that's the conversation I think a lot of teams are going to be having between like 10 and 30 is, do we want to take one of these edge rushers who's an idea, or do we want to take one of these defensive tackles who's more of a proven commodity right now? And I think pretty often I'm going to lean with the interior players among this group over the edge guys.
100%. I'm in the exact same boat. It's on my board. Harmon's 9, Walter Nolan's 12. Those guys are closer to hitting the NFL ready than any of the edges we talked about.
Why do you like Harmon more than Nolan? Because I think that's an interesting discussion. And I feel like whatever one of those guys you prefer, I think it says a lot about what you're looking for in players.
I think it's versatility with Harmon is that pretty much any scheme in the NFL you could run, he's a fit for. Nolan, I think it's much more of a 3-tech only. It's much more of a 1-gap scheme only. That's fine. That's, a lot of people are doing a little bit of both. Like, it's not like that's going to take them off a ton of boards. But I think it's just more Harmon, if you want to put him in any scheme, I don't see limitations that are going to be like, oh, I don't like that fit, right?
I tend to agree with you on that. And I think that's one of the other reasons I feel like Harmon's upside as a pass rusher is so intriguing. Imagine if you just let him go in the way that they just let Walter Nolan go this entire season and how productive he could be in that sort of role, because that's not what Oregon's defense was. Like, he had to eat up blocks. They just asked him to do different things, and he was still arguably more productive as a pass rusher than Nolan was.
Yes, and I like, and I think people talk about him as if he's just like this meh athlete, or just he doesn't get, Nolan, you like mentioned the athleticism first, and the explosiveness, and then with Harmon, it's kind of like an afterthought. You mentioned like the size and the frame, but it's like, dude, no, he's a high end athlete. If you go historically, defensive tackles going round one, he's very much up there.
I feel like part of the reason they're framed that way is that no one's kind of like a wild horse, and you notice the explosiveness where Harmon plays in such control that maybe it's a little bit less evident on tape, but I don't think that there's that big of a gap with them in practice athletically.
Yes, 100%. And I just to not to throw a stray at Kenneth Grant here, but like I think that they have a different level of athleticism in terms of making an impact as pass rushers than Grant does, where I just it's awesome for a nose tackle to be a little explosive, but I just don't see him as like a guy who can be a consistent pass rusher.
I tend to agree with that. And the other thing when watching them, I actually thought Harmon was a sturdier run defender than Kenneth Grant was, even in a smaller frame. Like, I feel like Grant was getting moved off his spot more often than Derek Harmon was, even as Grant is kind of framed and talked about as this massive run stopping presence.
Yeah, height's not a good skill for a nose tackle. Actually,
yeah,
it's counterintuitive. They look awesome, right? It looks scarier, but like Jordan Davis coming out, why hasn't he just been this monstrous presence that he was billed as? He gets moved off the ball, he get out leveraged. The trenches is a low man wins sort of game, and those guys just struggle to get low.
Yeah, and Derek Harmon, that's the fun part about Derek Harmon is even though he's 6'5", when you look at him, he doesn't look that tall because the frame is so filled out. He doesn't come across as like a tall player when you're watching him on tape, which is actually really interesting. All right, the Washington football franchise. We have 4 options with this team as well. I just couldn't stop myself. Because there are a bunch of different directions you could go here. All right, option 1, this is going to be the same for all these teams. Draft Shamar Stewart or James Pierce if you want to. They need an edge rusher. You look at the depth chart, you can make an argument that it might be the biggest need that they have right now. So that's your first option for Washington. Option 2, draft Omarion Hampton or a running back of your choosing if you want to go a different direction. Brian Robinson's contract is up after this year. Austin Eckler is your other option, who is 38 years old at this point. We're the same age. Option 3, draft your best available cornerback. They went out and got, I believe, Jonathan Jones in free agency. I'm not sure that's stopping you from drafting a guy high if you want to. Obviously, they've pumped a lot of resources into that position with the Marshawn Lattimore trade and using a second-round pick on Mikey Sainer still, but I think you can make a really strong argument that they still have a need at outside corner. Option 4, draft Nick Almanwari to be your other safety after moving on from Jeremy Chin. All they did was sign Will Harris to play next to Quan Martin. So I think both spots where they had a stopgap in free agency, you can make a strong argument might deserve this sort of investment in the first round. Mm-hmm. So your 4 options: draft Shamar Stewart or James Pierce, draft Omarion Hampton or a running back of your choice, draft your best available cornerback, draft Nick Almanwari, the safety from South Carolina. What are you doing if you are on the clock for Washington?
See, I'm a little interested in running back highly for the Commanders. They're a team where I wouldn't push back too much because of how just much is predicated on the running game there. But I still think in this class, it's just so deep. If it were last year's class and you just dropped Omarion Hampton in there, I would probably make that pick here. But it's not last year's class. There's so many good backs. I'm just going to wait on it. So I like Almanwari. I love him for the Commanders specifically as well. But I think James Pierce Jr. here in Dan Quinn's defense, with how much he's been able to just take advantage of speed rushers like him, guys who have high-end juice. He did it with Dallas. Guys like Sam Williams there. He could just, on stunts, on slants, just using that speed threat, I think, for that defense. And as you said, it might arguably be their biggest need, just getting an edge presence outside of Dorrance Armstrong. That's where I'm going for this one.
I like this, and one of the reasons I like it is because you have a guy like Dorrance Armstrong and another guy they signed Dietrich Wise in free agency too. Like, your other edge rushers on this roster right now are big-bodied guys where theoretically Pierce is complementary to that. And so I think for them specifically, his warts might not be quite as important as it might be for another team that needed a more well-rounded edge player.
No, I like that take, and it's yes, I mean, they just need some juice. And he's obviously 4.47. That's juice.
After Genty, where do you kind of stack the running backs and how? Because as I've gotten further into this process, and I can't remember who I was watching the other day when I came to this conclusion. It might have been Ibuka, and then I was watching Josh Simmons later. And so every time I've watched an Ohio State guy, my conclusion as part of that process is I think Travion Henderson's going to go way higher than we think he is. Like, I just don't think he lasts until the second round because of what he's bringing to the table. And that's kind of where I sit right now, is that I think Genty's a top 10 guy, and I think deservedly he's a top 10 guy. And after that, I honestly kind of think that Henderson might be the guy that teams talk themselves into quicker than anybody else because of what specifically he brings to the table.
So I have it as Genty's kind of his own tier. And then I think, so I love Dylan Sampson from Tennessee. I think him and Amarian Hampton, similar grades for me. They are do-it-all backs. I think those are two guys who can be a bell cow. And then I have kind of then this next tier, and I struggle to even call it a tier. I think Travion Henderson is elite for what he is, but he's not a full, well-rounded running back, right? He's not a bell cow running back. He is.
Do you think that matters less now than it did 5 years ago in how teams are conceiving of the position? Because that's the reason I think it might happen, because we don't really have that many well-rounded guys anymore. And if you're thinking about running back as a multiplayer room rather than I think this is the best all-around player, I think that gets you to a different place with Henderson than it might have been where you wanted your running back to play 45 snaps a game.
Yeah, I mean, but it's still not everyone is on that boat, right? Like, it's certain teams, teams will be on that boat. And so if you want, pass game back, pass down back, space back, you're just not going to find a lot better than Travion Henderson. And there's obviously, like, everyone loves this guy. He's a locker room leader. Just like, you're not going to find a red flag in his profile. And that's obviously going to sell evaluation too. So I see him in that. And then I would also put Cam Scatabo in that category as like an elite short yardage goal line-ish back. And so that's kind of how I have the top 5, whatever order you want to put them in. It's just like, you have these two bell cows, one just absurd prospect in Ashton Genty, and then two guys who are so good at one skill set that if you want to draft them, second round, top of the second round, because of that, I'm not going to complain. They are just, in what they do it so well.
Yeah, I've come around more and more as I've thought about it to the if Ashton Genty is on the board at 10, I think that's what I want the Bears to do. Initially, it was, I don't know. And now as I've thought more about it, if it's like him or one of the pass rushers, I think I'd probably want Genty in that situation. It took me a while to get there, but I think that's where I've arrived.
And there's something to that where, just look at the Eagles. You had this awesome offensive line, so dominant. What changed last year? Just the back. A back can take you to a different level. When you have the elite offensive line, and the Bears, I wouldn't call it elite, but it should be very good this year. If you have a very good offensive line, the back can put you over the edge. If you don't have it, back's obviously not going to get you to that point, but you can't get to where the Eagles got this year if you just had DeAndre Swift, Roschon Johnson. That ain't getting you there. You need both.
Let's get to the Buffalo Bills at 30 after James Pierce goes to Washington at 29. Option 1 for Buffalo. Draft your best available cornerback. I think that was kind of a secondary option for most of the teams we talked about to this point. For Buffalo, it feels like more of a glaring need. I mean, they did not bring back Rasul Douglas. They need another outside corner. Again, I think Dane Jackson right now would be slotted in there right now. Wouldn't love that if that's what I was walking into a training camp. So the Bills need a cornerback somewhere. I feel like this is a decent spot for one. Option 2, draft Shamar Stewart. Even with Joey Bosa, still think they could probably use a little bit of edge rush juice as like a multi-year option. So somebody with, again, super intriguing tools, wouldn't have to necessarily start for you in year 1, would have a little bit of a long runway. Think you could talk yourself into that if you were Buffalo. Option 3 was going to be draft Kenneth Grant or Derek Carman. Now it's just draft Kenneth Grant. You look at their interior players, Daquan Jones is getting a little bit older. They took the guy last year whose name I cannot remember, and I'm going to look it up right now.
Carter.
Yes, Dwayne Carter. Still feel like you could use at least one more piece. I think for Buffalo specifically, even if you look at the depth chart, nose is a more glaring need because you have Ed Oliver. I still think I'd want more of a pass rushing potential option there if I were Buffalo, just based on the rest of the makeup of the unit, which is why Harmon, I think, would be a little bit more attractive to me than Kenneth Grant would be. But I still feel like we can throw defensive tackle out as an option. So those are your 3 options here. Option 1, best available corner. Option 2, Shamar Stewart. Option 3, Kenneth Grant. What are you doing if you were the Bills?
See, the thing about Shamar Stewart is you got to go chase down Patrick Mahomes, and he was abysmal at chasing down quarterbacks. I mean, that's how he ends up with never more than a sack and a half in a single season. It's just like he can't finish in space. And so you're just going to be left with a guy just nipping at Mahomes' heels in the playoffs, and every Bills fan is going to be crying. So I think the corner need is so great that here's where I'm willing to go corner. Just based off of tape, Benjamin Morrison's my top available corner. I don't know enough medically, and I don't think a hip injury is a good thing for a cornerback. So I'll be
multiple hip injuries, right?
Yeah, right. I think it's the same one. Not good. So I'll probably go down to my next. I believe Maxwell Harrison's still on the board, Kentucky corner.
Yes,
he is my next guy, and some speed too, right? You're going to have to go through Xavier Worthy, Zay Flowers to get through the AFC. Jamar Chase. 4.28 speed to guard those guys is going to help. So I'll go with Maxwell Harrison.
Makes total sense to me. Again, I think corner is the one that I would probably keep coming back to for Buffalo based on what they did in free agency. Is there a position or a player that I did not mention for Buffalo that would come to mind for you that you wish I did?
I was intrigued by Nick Manwari here too. The
Okay.
South Carolina safety. I just hate. Now they drafted Cole Bishop in the second last year.
They did.
And he's bigger. They're hoping he develops into a starting role. I just hate how small their safeties are. Taylor Rapp, DeMar Hamlin. When again, you got to tackle Derrick Henry. Like those guys versus Derrick Henry is not good. I want some size to come downhill and to make more plays around the line of scrimmage in the running game because their front seven is not a good run defending front seven. It is undersized. They play super aggressively up the football field. I want someone who can clean that up, and I do not see that from what they have in there right now.
I totally agree with that. I actually think when you conceive of safety groups in the NFL, pass defense is the first thing that you're going to think about. But when I was watching that team last year, the run defense is what really scared me. The game that keeps coming back and kept coming back as we talked about the Bills last year was that game against the Colts, where they just could not tackle on the second or third level. And I was really worried about that into the playoffs, and they haven't really done anything to alleviate that. And if you look at the makeup of the room, they signed Taylor Rapp to a 3-year contract. He has a $3.6 million cap hit this year. Like, they did not invest a ton into Taylor Rapp, and I kind of think he's best used as a third safety within that defense anyway. So the argument for Manwari I actually think is a pretty good one. Let's say we open this back up. And let's say I give you that as an option with Maxwell Harrison. Which one would you do?
I think I like it, Manwari, because they have to be the lightest team up the middle in the entire NFL. When you go from DTs to linebackers to safeties, if you just added all that weight up, they have to be the lightest. I don't even think it's like close. Their linebackers are 220 and under. Their DTs at Oliver's like 280. Daquan's up there, but like their safeties then are both sub 200 pounds. There's just no size up that middle of the football field. And Manwari, obviously one of the biggest safeties in the NFL from day one.
They have 2 second-round picks. Do you feel like the depth and makeup of the corner group would allow them to have a guy in the second round that they might be able to pick there and drop in as a starter? And the gap between that and a Maxwell Harrison would be enough for you to pass on corner in the first round?
I think so. I at the back end here, it's just now I do actually like Maxwell Harrison a good amount, but after that, I feel like everyone else, whether it's Trey Amos or anyone else getting Savone Revel, I don't see them as first round corners. Revel might even be on the board at like 56 when the Bills are drafting, so maybe
56 and 62 because they have that they have that pick from the Diggs trade that actually belongs to the Vikings.
Okay, so I think there's a good chance that corner value will be there. Whereas if you want that safety in round 2, who can be kind of what we just said, Xavier Watts or Kevin Winston Jr., the Notre Dame, Penn State safeties respectively, are probably the only two that fit that bill. I think both might be gone too. Like they might not be there just because it's a thin safety class.
Interesting makeup of the Bills draft picks. They have 30, which is theirs. They have 56, which belonged to the Texans from the Vikings. They have an extra 4th-round pick from the Austin Booker Bears trade last year. Remember, the Bears traded back into the draft to get Austin Booker and gave away a 4th in that. And then they have a couple extra 5th-round comp picks. So quietly like a decent amount of draft capital for the Bills this year, especially when you consider the fact that they traded away a 3rd-round pick in the Amari Cooper trade.
Yeah, they have to be trading up, right? There might not be more than like 2 starting spots available on this roster. I don't see them making all those picks. I bet they're moving up with either in round 1 or round 2 to go get a guy.
That's the team I'd probably have an eye on. But I will say, I think that Bean's history is interesting here because every time he's done something overly aggressive, it has come back to bite him. And I do think it might make them a little bit gun shy. Because look at the things they've done where they stepped outside of themselves a little bit. Trading out for Kyer Elam, the Von Miller trade. Even the Amari Cooper deal, I think you could throw into this bucket where when they've tried to get a little bit ahead of themselves, those are some of the worst moves that they have made. And so I'm not sure how much that's going to affect the way that they approach this draft, because it did affect the way they approach free agency a little bit. They did not do anything crazy. Like the Joey Bosa thing, I think is a worthwhile swing. Other than that, we're talking about like very modest approaches for doubles potentially in free agency for a team you could say is right on the cusp. So their just mindset overall this offseason, I think, has been interesting to say the least.
Yeah, they are an interesting team because they were built for a while there via free agency, right? It was a team that was a lot of free agents. And then they kind of had to make this transition to, that can only last for so long. So we had to go to cheap homegrown guys. And they've hit on a few, right? But I think they haven't really hit enough big swings to keep up with the Chiefs, who have hit on a bunch of those when they made that transition.
I 100% agree with that. And I think that is the best argument for why they should wield some of that draft capital to move up. Because when you're picking 28 through 32 every single year, you're probably going to come away with some underwhelming guys, right? Like your Greg Rousseaus are the players you're going to be picking at the end of the first round. He's a nice piece. He was worth extending, but he's not a blue chip guy. So that's to me the best argument in the draft for them being a little bit aggressive is they're coming away with way too many Bs and B pluses. And I think that's what's kind of limiting their ceiling as a team. Is this the year, because you've got some extra picks, to try to move up for one of these guys, especially in a draft where it might cost a little bit less to move up because of how people are conceiving of the class overall.
Well, and just how many GMs now are analytically driven who are like, oh, I can get any draft capital back. Even if it's a tie on the value board or whatever, we'll do it. So, yeah.
Is there a guy like in the top 15 that you would like for them? Like if they were going to make a big move up the board, is there somebody you think would make sense?
Ooh, that's good. I would love, if they could get within striking distance of, I was going to say Derek Harmon. But if Will Johnson falls down the board a little bit,
that's a really good one.
Christian Benford is one where now he doesn't necessarily need to be top 15, but I think he's definitely not falling to them at 30. So that's one where if he fell to within striking distance, I think, 20 is a fair striking distance for them. You're jumping Pittsburgh, you're jumping Green Bay, who would be in the market. That's a player I'd be interested in.
I like that a lot, actually. I think that makes a lot of sense. All right, the Kansas City Chiefs at 31. Option 1 for Kansas City. Draft your best available offensive lineman. Josh Connerly was going to be involved in this. The Rams took him at 26. Ursary from Minnesota, I assume, is one of your best available tackles. But if you'd rather prefer somebody else at tackle, that's available to you. I'd also listen to a guard here because I think you could honestly make an argument that guard could be a bigger need for them than tackle after signing Jalen Moore in free agency. So Tyler Booker or Gray Zabel, if you want to draft either of those guys, that's fine here. So your best available offensive lineman. Option 2, draft Kenneth Grant. It was going to be Kenneth Grant or Derek Carman. I think defensive tackle is a huge need for this team. So Kenneth Grant is your second option. Option 3, draft your best available running back.
I think I'm leaning. I just don't have a high grade on Kenneth Grant, unfortunately. He is,
and I think that's okay.
Mid to late second round for me. Just too.
Is there another defensive tackle that would intrigue you here?
No, truthfully, I think he is the next defensive tackle on my board, but it's still like 20 places away from where I would take one. Actually, no, Tyleik Williams is next on my board. Sorry, excuse me. But still, I'd say it's just a little bit of a reach. I just never see Tyleik being, first round. I would want some pass rushing juice from a DT. I just think historically where you've been able to find good run defending DTs, you don't have to use a first round pick on them. You can find them third, fourth. It's not. I'd say it's easy to do it, but there's one or two every single class. You can wait. So I'm looking offensive line. I just think the one thing standing between you and a couple Super Bowls right now is any semblance of pass protection. A couple more Super Bowls, excuse me. They have 3. Is any semblance of pass pro, right? The 2 Super Bowls where it just fell apart completely, that's when it That's when he lost. So I want to get to the point where I'm never worried. Like I'm never having that conversation of how do we get this bad. So, gosh, for them, I probably lean Gray Zabel for them, just with what they already have there, his versatility, and just that's just close. I don't know, Booker or Zabel. Which would you go between those two? I'm curious for the Chiefs.
It's a great question. I feel like the versatility with Zabel matters less for a team with the highest paid center in the league, right?
That's what,
and so
his interior versatility, you're not playing him at center right guard, though.
Exactly.
So.
And so I think that the fact that those are the two spots that are really locked down for the next several years for you, I assume they get something done with Trey Smith. And Trey Smith and Creed Humphrey are going to be pillars of that team for a very long time. That's why Zabel, I think the selling point or one of the selling points is a little less important here. Schematically, they do a little bit of everything. So I think that having Booker, if you're going to be a gap scheme team, is okay in a way that it might not be for some other teams. I guess my question is going to be, who do you think is the better pass protector? And is that the thing that you are weighing over the other variables here if you're the Chiefs?
Yeah, it probably is. And I think Booker is just going to give you firmer pockets. Pass protections, it's like a few different things that always, it's like, how often do you lose cleanly? How often do you, but then also like, are you consistently getting walked back a little into the pocket? And I think Zabel, you worry a little bit more about the firmness he would hold up against bull rushes compared to Booker, who's just like stout as can be. That guy is a brick wall.
Imagine Creed Humphrey, Trey Smith, and Booker as your three interior players. There'd be a lot of room for activities in the pocket right there if you're Patrick Mahomes.
Yeah, he can figure it out with some less than stellar OTs. Yeah, we've convinced each other, I think. I'm going Tyler Booker.
Because even if you think, all right, we're going to move Sumatai inside, it's still a question. You've still never seen him do it before. And so the idea of rolling into the season with him having to develop again at a different position, it would make me just a little bit itchy. If I were a Chiefs fan and if I were that front office, I would want a little bit more certainty there. And especially because there isn't that pass rushing defensive tackle on the board where you're going to drop him next to Chris Jones. It's going to be the last thing we need for the defense. I think that's how you can arrive at guard here if you're Brett Veach and those guys.
Yeah. And like Sumaia and Wanya Morris are tackles, right? There's no reason to be guards other than that they stunk at tackles, right? It's not like, oh, there's this big issue. It's not like Will Campbell's wingspan or like other issues that arise at tackle. It's just like, no, they just weren't good. So like, let's kick them inside so like that doesn't get exposed as often, but you're still going to get exposed if you're that inept with your hand usage.
Yeah, I like Booker there because, again, Jalen Moore, even if it's somewhat of a question mark, you have committed there. And guard to me right now, as of April 21st, is still a bigger question on that roster right now than tackle, even with some of the questions about Jalen Moore. So I totally am fine with that. The Philadelphia Eagles, to round this out at 32. Option 1, draft your cornerback of choice. Move on from Darius Slay, probably a need for that team right now. Option 2, draft Gray Zabel. One of your guard spots, again, a need after letting Mekhi Becton go in free agency. They traded for Kenyon Green in that CJ Gardner-Johnson deal, but that's kind of a low-risk bet. Are you comfortable with that heading into the year? Would you rather spend a little bit more on interior offensive line? Option 3 was going to be Nick Amenwari. He is off the board. So with him off the board, your favorite defensive front player. Edge rusher, defensive tackle. They lost Josh Sweat and Milton Williams in free agency, so I think you could justify either one of those positions. So your 3 options for Philly: your cornerback of choice, Gray Zabel, or your defensive front player of choice with Amenwari off the board. What are you doing if you're on the clock for Philadelphia?
I'm going to keep going defensive front. You didn't get to that Super Bowl last year by ignoring it for a year. You just keep going back to the well. Keep hitting it with top draft capital. And the top guy on my board actually right now is Nick Scorton, Texas A&M defensive end. And I think this is, I don't think he falls too far from, he was a top 10 guy preseason in pretty much every mock. He's still, I believe he's the second youngest guy in the entire draft class. Still super young. That talent didn't go away. And if anyone can get a guy with talent to get to his top level, like it's the Philadelphia Eagles. So their track record. So I'm going to go Nick Scorton.
I like Nick Scorton. I watched him for the first time last week when I was studying some of the defensive tackles. I watched that Mizzou game. He got Membu multiple different times for like TFLs as a run defender. He plays hard. He's built the right way. But him going over Shamar Stewart, that would be a fun bet. If you could get that in Vegas right now, Nick Scorton goes over Shamar Stewart. That might be a pretty fun one on draft night.
You get long odds, but I just, again, I don't see a guy who's necessarily limited by his athleticism. It's kind of how I like to talk about edge rushers. There are some that are definitely, like some guys in this draft class, Jack Sawyer, Jared Ivey, where it's like they're limited by their athleticism. Nick Scorton can be a high-end guy. He's got good burst at his size. He was just heavy last year, heavier than you should be for a 4.3 defensive end, right? I think if he gets into the 260s, with how strong his upper body is, with how just kind of fluid he is as an athlete, that guy can reach a pretty darn high ceiling. That Stewart's got a high ceiling, but I think we just always equate pure combine numbers with ceiling when that's not always the case.
Yeah, they signed Azeez Ojulari in free agency. I believe that was a 1-year deal. So that 1 year, $3 million for Ojulari, and then your other outside linebacker, pass rusher in the mix right now is Jalix Hunt, who showed some flashes last year, but was still a 3rd-round pick. So I'm not sure the makeup of the current Eagles roster would dissuade you from taking an edge rusher here if that was the guy that you thought was the best player available.
And yeah, you're real small. You are real small right now, defensive end. Nolan, Huff, Ojulari, Hunt, all undersized guys. So not that that's the worst thing in the world. Like Smith has never played undersized, but just adding some size there will help.
Yeah, and again, I think if you're worried about size and run defense, Scourton is bringing that to the table. It's maybe his biggest selling point at this right now. Mm-hmm. All right, that's it. Those are our 32 first-round picks. Again, I read most of them off at the top. I'm not doing that again, but I'm sure we'll put this out after this exercise is over. But that is our 5th and final installment of the On the Clock series that we have done. Very much have enjoyed doing this. Anybody you would have drafted that I did not mention for these 7 picks that you were surprised did not come off the board in the first round here?
Oh, gosh. Honestly, we got to – I'm looking at my board right now. I think we hit – Emeka Ibuka, did he come off the board?
Yes. He went to the Chargers at 22.
So then we got my top 25 guys.
That's pretty good.
Came off the board. So that is pretty good. Yeah. My next one, the first guy that was on my board that didn't come off, Kyle Williams, the Washington State wide receiver. So – big fan of his. We'll see where he ends up going. Not as big a fan as Chris.
Where do you have him?
26th. I think he's great.
I also think he's great. We talked about the receivers last week, and it's always funny for me because I come to it so late that I have no real preconceived notions of these guys. Mm-hmm. And so for me, it's just, what is he when I watch him? Because I didn't have an opinion of him before the season. It's just whatever the tape from 2024 tells me. And when I watched Kyle Williams, I was just like, first of all, my Kyle Williams thing is, again, the way that I've the whispers that I've heard, it was the Senior Bowl stuff. He was a separator. It's all these releases. And you see that when you watch him on tape. But you combine that with what he does with the ball in his hands. And he was just a different sort of player than I expected him to be based on how I had heard other people talk about him in the process. I guess that's what I would say.
Yeah, he is great with the rock. He breaks tackles. He plays strong. He's kind of like a poor man's-ish. He's in that Dolphins wide receiver mold, like your Tyreek Hill, Jalen Waddle, where just because they're, 180 something pounds doesn't mean they're necessarily weak the way you'd think like 180 pound speed receivers are. They got a little bit more to their game than that.
I guess the guy I would compare that to, and he's bigger than this player, but like with Zay Flowers was very good with the ball in his hands at Boston College, but you still saw the route running stuff, and the combination of those two things, Kyle Williams in like the best case scenario feels like a slightly bigger version of what Zay Flowers brings to the table.
Yeah, just like a little bigger catch radius version of Zay Flowers. I like that.
And I like Zay Flowers, so I would not mind Kyle Williams being a little bit overdrafted at all if that's what ends up happening. Mike Renner, sincerely appreciate it, my friend. Please tell people where they could check out the draft stuff you're doing and just everything that you're doing over there at CBS.
Yeah, you can find me at X at Mike Renner _. You can listen to the pod, Pushing the Pile podcast, wherever you get your podcasts. You can check me out night 1. I'm on the Bleacher Report draft show with Darius Slay, who we mentioned a little bit earlier, new Pittsburgh Steeler, and Micah Parsons, who's going to be in media for like the next 30 years. That guy
he already is in media.
Dude, right?
He's already one of the best posters on the football internet.
He'll start talking about cap space on the draft show, and I'm like, who are you? Like, why do you know the cap situation of the Arizona Cardinals? But he does. Micah Parsons, interesting cat. So go ahead and check that out. And then I'll be on CBS. We can't actually live stream stuff as a NFL, which I didn't know until I
As a
joined
rights
CBS.
holder?
As a rights holder that broadcasts games. Can't actually do any live streams, but we'll be doing videos on the YouTube channel after the fact.
Awesome. Please go check that out. Just as a reminder, this is coming out on Tuesday, 2 days from now, Thursday night, live on YouTube, 7:30 p.m. Eastern. Me, Dane Brugler, Bruce Feldman, Derek Klassen, breaking down every single pick of round one. Please come check that out. We'll be back on Friday with me, Dane, and Derek at 6:30 p.m. Eastern, reacting to every single pick from the second and third rounds. So if you would love to spend some time with us on the first 2 nights of the draft, we would love to have you. Please check out that stuff on YouTube. We'll be posting about it all week. Very much looking forward to it. Very excited for draft week to be here. For now, that's all we got. Appreciate you guys listening. We will talk to you very soon. Thanks for watching the Athletic Football Show. Subscribe to the channel to keep up with us. Like and comment on this video, and we'll see you next time.